Hello, I'm Mercedes Stevenson, and this is the West Block, politics, perspectives, and players. Organized crime and money laundering. Experts from around the world met in Ottawa to discuss what the Canadian government can do to fight back against that and the growing underground economy. Joining me now is John Penrose. He is the UK's Minister of State for Northern Ireland, as well as the Prime Minister's point person on anti-corruption. Welcome to Canada.
Thank you very much.
You've been here talking about money laundering. It's something that we've certainly had a lot of concern about in Canada recently, calls for an inquiry and more to be done. Can you tell me a little bit about the advice that you were giving at this conference about what governments can do to try to combat this problem?
Well, the first thing to say is that nowhere is immune from this. We have the same or similar problems in London, in the UK, and many, many other countries around the world are facing this. And the problem is that you get organised criminals, sometimes you get state actors too, but certainly organised criminals. And as someone put it to me the other day, criminals don't do crime for fun, they do it for money. And having done it for money, they then got to find some way of laundering that money and investing it so they can live off it later. And that's where the anti-money laundering stuff comes in. Broadly speaking, the biggest answer to this is being transparent, is making it impossible, or as hard as you possibly can, for criminals to move dirty money around the globe and in the process try to make it look like it's clean, and then they can invest it in legitimate assets and places to live in, whether it's Vancouver or London or Manhattan, it doesn't matter. And so what you've got to try and do is to make sure that they can't move it without it being spotted. And that's all about just saying who controls companies. Shell companies can be used to move money around the globe, other kinds of organizations, trusts and the like as well, so that whenever they try, we can follow the money. And at that point, we can get the assets back, we can take them off them, they can hit them in the pocketbook where it hurts. And ultimately, once we've done that, we can track down the individual concerned, and we've then got the case, the court case, to put them in jail if necessary.
So can you explain to me a little bit about how you do that tracking? How do you find out who owns the companies, who's behind them? Because that's been one of the big difficulties here in Canada.
Yeah.
You see the company's name, you might suspect who's behind it, but there's not a way to find out.
And that's a problem the world over. There is an answer, but it does require lots of countries to do the same thing, which is to basically say, you have to reveal who runs the company. It isn't just enough to say there's another company behind that and another company behind that and another company behind that. You've got to say, no, who's the person, the living, breathing person with a pulse, who actually owns it, or who controls it in some way or another, manages the thing. And if you've got genuine people, as I said, someone with a pulse, then you've got someone to go after. And you can also say they may have 8 companies under their control or 88 companies under their control, all called different things. But if it's the same individual, then at that point you can track what's going on. So it's a question of pulling aside those veils of secrecy and saying, no, we can tell who this person is. And at that point, they have many fewer places left to hide.
What are the obstacles to putting that kind of a regime in place? Because it seems like it makes perfect sense.
A couple of obstacles, but broadly speaking, it's just because historically it's not been done that way. So there's a huge sort of weight of history behind it, and we've got to persuade lots of different countries around the world all to move in the same direction, because it's all very well for the UK to make its company register completely transparent, so anyone in Canada could look up who owns and runs British companies. And it would be all very well for Canada to do the same in return. But if 5 other countries around the world haven't done it, then the organised criminals will basically route their money through those other countries and mean that the trail would go cold when you reach one of those secrecy jurisdictions. So you've got to get enough other countries, particularly the ones with big international financial centres in them. So the UK is one of them with the City of London, but the USA would be really helpful because they've got New York and so on.
Or Canada with Vancouver, perhaps?
Well, exactly. So anywhere where there's a developed banking system which can move money around, if we can get those countries to make themselves fully transparent so you can tell who's behind any of their companies, then at that point we're a long way closer to being able to solve this problem and to track down the criminals and to follow the money.
There is this concern in Canada because there has been increasing awareness of the money laundering that's happening here, particularly through Chinese organized crime in real estate and in casinos. Is that a reputation that's starting to reach the UK about Canada and raising concerns?
I think that some of the reports that have come out about the problems in BC are relatively recent, so it hasn't hit many people's consciousness in the UK yet. But the thing which we in the UK know about ourselves, being host to the City of London, is we are all vulnerable to reputational damage. And it doesn't take much for a country's reputation to get dented, and once the country's reputation is dented, then all the businesses and the banks and the lawyers and the accountants, everybody's reputation who seeks to do business in that country is dented too by association. So we've all got a heck of a lot to lose, the UK just as much as Canada.
Turning to Brexit, do you believe that a deal is possible by that October 31st deadline?
It's possible, but it's difficult, and it's been difficult all the way through, and it's one of these things where anybody who turns around and says, oh, it's easy, you just do X or you just do Y, I think is forgetting the fundamental truth, which is that for any negotiated agreement, you've got to have both sides coming to an agreement and both sides have to say yes. And the difficulty is that this is something that no one's ever done before. No one's ever left the EU before. So no one quite knows how to do it well. And it's proving extremely tricky because you've got 27 countries on one side in the EU, all of whom want to achieve all sorts of other things as well. Britain wanting to leave, and it's proving extremely tricky. So yes, it is possible. We haven't managed it yet. I don't want to underestimate or understate the differences. The difficulties they're really strong. But yeah, you've got to believe it is possible, and we owe it to British citizens, and I think we also owe it to EU citizens to keep trying. One
of the difficulties, of course, is the situation in Northern Ireland, and how do you deal with that? That's part of your portfolio, Northern Ireland. Yeah. How do you deal with negotiating a Brexit without stirring up the troubles again in Northern Ireland? Because that has been a flashpoint.
Yeah, absolutely right, and it is absolutely essential that we don't recreate some of the conditions which destroyed peace in Northern Ireland, and which in the 20-odd years since something called the Belfast Agreement, which is kind of the foundational peace agreement that brought peace back to Northern Ireland, it's vital that we don't put that at risk. So the essential thing is that the border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland is at the moment, it exists on a map, but you can drive across it without having to show your passport. You can take goods across it without having to worry about customs and those sorts of things. And the crucial thing must be that after we leave the EU, that border must not become a hard border. It must still be porous. It must still be something which you can drive across without having to worry. Now, you may still need to fill out passport, you need to fill out customs controls or something like that in future, but when you cross that border, it needs to be pretty much invisible to the person driving the car or driving the truck.
Is that possible?
Yes, it must be. And the reason why I say that is because both the Southern Irish government and the UK government, and indeed pretty much every single politician in Northern Ireland, says, look, we do not want to go back to where we were. And we all understand the absolute centrality of not breaching the terms of that peace treaty signed in 1998. And that peace treaty says you cannot have a hard border. So nobody wants it. Nobody will impose it. Nobody will even tolerate the notion about putting up a border post or a checkpoint on that border. So with both sides acknowledging that, then you have to believe it's possible. But the devil is very firmly in the detail. It is not an easy thing to do. There are all sorts of examples around the world of very porous borders, thin borders. I mean, the one between the USA and Canada is fairly thin, but you still have to show your passport as you go across. So there are examples of borders around the world which are close, but nothing's quite going to be the same because the Northern Ireland situation is just so unique. So it's possible with goodwill, and there is goodwill on both sides, but an awful lot of details to sort out first.
I have to ask you one last question because it's such a fascinating time right now politically in the UK. Your Prime Minister is set to step down from her position in coming days, and there's questions about whether or not there should be an early election. Do you think that Brits should go to the poll early?
No, I don't. Is the simple answer. And I think there are several reasons for that. One is very simply that I think that Brits need to see that the result of the referendum to leave the EU has been delivered. And only once that has been done, because they voted on that once, and there was a very clear answer to it, and they need to see that that's been done. Once that has been done, then we can think again about other polls, etc., etc. But until that has been done, there's a job to do, and stopping and saying, I'm terribly sorry, we're going to take 2 months off to have a general election campaign. Don't worry about Brexit, it can wait. I think people will take a pretty dim view of that, and I think they'd be right to.
Minister, thank you for stopping by to join us while you were in the capital.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's all the time we have for today. For the West Block, I'm Mercedes Stevenson. Thank you for joining us.